The land was quiet in the way only open country can be. Too wide, too honest, too unconcerned with whether a person lived or disappeared into it. Morning light crept over the low hills like a tired apology, touching frost and dead grass and the narrow ribbon of a creek that no one named anymore. That was where she lay, Eliza May Carter, young enough that her face still held softness, sick enough that every breath felt borrowed. Her dress was damp at the hem. Her hands shook even when she tried to keep them still. The wedding ring on her finger had grown loose. It slipped and clicked softly against bone when she moved. Some people aren't left with words. They're left with weather. And that morning, the cold spoke clearly. She remembered the sound of boots walking away more than the sound of his voice. Hank hadn't shouted. He hadn't cursed. He had done something worse. He had decided she was no longer worth the trouble of anger. The sickness had come slow like dusk. First the cough, then the weakness, then the way neighbors stopped asking her to help with things that mattered. Hank drank more after that. He drank because the house felt smaller with her lying still in it. He drank because illness made him afraid, and fear made him cruel in quiet ways. He began leaving earlier, coming home later. Some nights, not at all. Eliza told herself it would pass. She told herself love was supposed to endure sickness. She told herself many things that did not turn out to be true. The last ride was short. He helped her down from a wagon, as if she were already a burden he'd set aside in his mind. No kiss, no promise to return. Just a blanket folded too thin, dropped at her feet. "I'll come back," he said, and the lie didn't even bother to sound convincing. She watched the wagon disappear between the trees, dust lifting behind it like a curtain closing. For a while, she waited. Then waiting became lying still. Then lying still became hoping the cold would be quicker than the pain. Time slowed the way it does when the body is failing. The creek whispered nonsense. Birds moved on without noticing her. Eliza drifted in and out of memory. Her mother braiding her hair once, long ago, the smell of bread when she was strong enough to bake, the sound of laughter she used to think belonged to her life. Shame pressed heavier than the cold. She wondered if the town had been right all along, if sickness really did make a woman smaller, if being left was simply the world correcting a mistake. She did not hear the footsteps at first. They were careful, as if whoever made them didn't want to disturb anything that still belonged to the earth. A shadow crossed the light. Then a man's voice, not loud, not sharp, just present. "You alive?" he asked, not unkindly. Eliza opened her eyes to see a figure shaped by years outdoors. Broad shoulders wrapped in worn wool, beard threaded with gray, eyes that looked like they had learned patience the hard way. Silas Boone, though she would not know his name yet, she would remember the way he waited for her answer without impatience. He knelt, keeping a respectful distance. He did not touch her right away. That mattered. He held out a canteen. When she struggled, he steadied it, his hands rough but gentle, as if he knew the difference between strength and force. He didn't ask who had left her, didn't ask what she'd done to deserve it. He said only, "Cold will finish what sickness started. We should move." The word we landed softly, but it landed. The journey to his cabin passed like a half-remembered dream. Pines closed around them, their scent sharp and clean. Silas walked steadily, never complaining, adjusting his pace to her breathing. When she stumbled, he caught her, not close, not improper, just enough to keep her upright. She noticed small things, the rhythm of his steps, the way he spoke to the mule as if it were an old friend, the silence he allowed to stretch without filling it with questions. Trust crept in quietly, the way warmth returns to fingers one ache at a time. The cabin stood where the mountain folded in on itself, modest and weathered, smoke rising thin from the chimney. Inside, there was firelight and order, a pot already warming, blankets that smelled of pine and soap. Silas set to work without ceremony, water heated, herbs crushed, a bed made near the hearth. Eliza waited for the price of such care to be named. It never was. When night came, he took a chair by the door and slept sitting up, coat still on, as if guarding something fragile. As the fire settled into coals, Eliza felt something unfamiliar loosen in her chest. Not hope, not yet. Something quieter. The simple understanding that she had been found. That whatever the town believed, whatever her husband had decided, she was still here. Still breathing. Still worth the trouble of another human being's kindness. The sickness did not vanish. The pain did not leave all at once. But warmth held, steady and real. And before sleep finally claimed her, Eliza thought, not for the first time, but for the first time without doubt, I was thrown away. But I'm not broken. Morning returned in small mercies. Steam lifted from the pot as Silas stirred without hurry, the spoon tapping the rim in a slow, patient rhythm. Eliza woke to the sound and to the unfamiliar feeling of having made it through the night. Light slid through the narrow window and settled on the floorboards like it had chosen to stay. Her body was still weak, but the shaking had eased. When Silas noticed she was awake, he only nodded, as if survival were not a miracle but something expected of her. He set the bowl beside her, waited while she ate, and turned back to his work without watching. That too mattered. In the quiet days that followed, healing came not as a sudden change, but as a series of small permissions. Permission to rest, to sit upright, to step outside and feel sun on her face without fearing it would be the last time. As her strength returned, so did her need to be useful. Eliza began with sweeping, slow, and careful, the broom scratching softly across the floor. Later she cooked, simple meals that tasted like remembering who she had been. Silas accepted these offerings without comment, as if he understood that dignity grows best when it is not announced. They spoke little, but they learned the shape of each other's silences. He left her wildflowers on the table without explanation. She stitched the tear in his coat before he noticed it was there. Affection settled between them the way dust does in a long-closed room. Quiet, inevitable, impossible to deny once the light hit it just right. The town did not share the mountain's patience. Whispers traveled faster than truth ever had. Mrs. Wilcox leaned across her counter and said Eliza's name with a tone that bent it into something shameful. A young woman, sickly and unmarried now, in all but law, living under a mountain man's roof. People stared when Silas rode in for supplies. They asked questions meant to sound polite. Eliza heard them from the edge of the trees one afternoon and felt herself fold inward, the old belief rising again, that survival did not entitle her to respect. That being saved did not mean being accepted. The past arrived one evening on unsteady legs and smelling of liquor. Hank stood in the doorway as if he still belonged there, eyes narrowing when he saw Eliza upright. Color returned to her cheeks. He laughed once, sharp and ugly, said he'd come and take his wife home. The words pressed against her chest like a hand. Eliza waited for Silas to speak, to intervene, to claim her in some way that would make this easier. He did not. He stepped back instead, giving her the space of choice. That was the moment everything changed. Her voice shook, but it held. She told Hank about the cold creek and the thin blanket and the night he did not come back. She told him how she had waited to die and been found instead. The mountain listened. The trees did not interrupt. Even Hank seemed smaller beneath her words. When a sheriff came, drawn by rumor and raised voices, Eliza did not retreat. She stood where she was and told the truth again, slower this time, so no one could pretend not to understand it. Silence followed, thick and complete. Then the law did what it should have done all along. Hank left alone, anger spent, ownership broken at last. Life did not change loudly after that. It changed the way mountains do, by remaining. The town learned to look at Eliza differently, or at least to look away. She stayed in the cabin through the turning of seasons, strength building in her hands, laughter finding its way back into her breath. She and Silas worked side by side, not naming what grew between them. Some things are stronger without being spoken. On certain mornings, when the light was just right, she would catch him watching her, as if she were something rare the world had trusted him to keep safe. If you're listening to this because you have been left somewhere cold, by a person, by a season, by life itself, remember this. Being abandoned is not the same as being unworthy. Sometimes survival comes dressed as silence, as patience, as one steady soul who does not demand proof of your value. And sometimes love is not the moment someone chooses you loudly, but the long, gentle truth of being allowed to stand again, on your own feet, in the warmth you thought you had lost forever.